Hello, good afternoon. Can you hear me? Okay. So you guys can hear me, right? You can also can you also see the screen? I'm sharing files with you. Okay. Okay. Let me also share my cam. Okay. So can you see me now? Okay. Good. Okay. So what is it that we have today? Like always, we have lots of things to cover. Okay. So, over the past perhaps 3 weeks, we've been talking about short stories, and last time we started approaching poetry, right? Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, so what is it that we're going to do today? We're going to divide the class into two sections. We're going to start with poetry and then end the class with short stories. We normally start with short stories and then we proceed or make the transition to poetry. This time around, we're starting a different approach where we start with poetry and then move to short stories. Okay, so how many poems do we have? I mean, if you check them on the course calendar, we have perhaps 3 or 4 poems. One of them happens to be not taken by Robert Frost, and this is what the TMA is about or is on. The other 2 or 3 poems are, poems that are meant to kind of develop in you this sense of critiquing, and also eventually, and it is hopeful that by the end of the course you'll be able to kind of approach poetry in a critical way. First of all, you develop appreciation for poetry in general, and then when you approach poems, you know how to handle them, and you don't just depend on the biographical aspects of poems, who the poet is and what age he was born and raised in. Like I said, this epistemological approach, let me say, is not the best of all possible approaches. There are more to poetry than the biography of the author or the poet and his age and stuff like that, right? Um, so let's start. Let's proceed to the part that we're handling today. Like I said, this time around we're starting with poetry and then we move on to non-poetry. What did we say about poetry? Because obviously this is not our first time. I mean, we spoke about poetry before. We spoke about how different it is in terms of form. You don't have this margin to margin lines. We also spoke about figurative language and imagery, and we also spoke about the musical effect that poetry or the poem should have on you. And we said that all these factors contribute towards an overall poetic experience that the poet and the reader or the hearer of the poem should share. Spoke about that. And I'm hopeful that you guys are now um, more aware of what poetry is about than ever before. Poetry is for everyone. I mean, there are a number of myths that we need to debunk. One such myth has to do with, that you're given to poetry, you like poetry, and in this way you can understand poetry and appreciate it, and other people don't like poetry but they cannot understand it, and hence they wouldn't be able to appreciate it. We're trying to say that poetry is for everyone, provided you know how to approach it. Okay, and also we're trying to say that we have inherited legacies of reading poetry that focus on the biography of the poet, on the age of the poet, um, and this is obviously not very ideal. Yeah, it can be one of the approaches. It can be an approach among others, but to have it as the main approach, that would perhaps need reconsideration. Okay. Um, so I did my research about poetry, and I came across a very nice and a very interesting website that is dedicated to poetry, and perhaps spreading awareness about what poetry is. Um, and I have the source. We're going to go. I mean, I have taken some of what they say, and let's put this to debate. Let's talk about that, and out of the conversations that we will have, lots of things will clear out, as what poetry is, what poetry stands for, what makes poetry poetry, how different poetry is from the other genres. But before I start, and like I said, this is not our first time that we have been talking about poetry for quite some time. Give me, when I say poetry now, when I say the word poetry, what what are the associations that the word trigger at the back of your minds? Okay, so let's talk about the associations that the word poetry has in every and each one's mind. Okay, Maha saying stanzas. The fact that Yasmin is saying rhythm, rhyme, la'anud. Yes, interesting. Okay, so you have rhythm, you have rhyme, which you don't have in non-poetry, right? You have stanzas, which you don't have in non-poetry because you have paragraphs in non-poetry. What do you mean by lines here, Abdul Wahab? All the genres have that. How unique these lines are. You need to perhaps tweak it so that you can say that the lines are unique. Unique in the sense that and they are not long. Sometimes they are short and long. You don't have specific standard. It depends on the poet and stuff. Abdul Mohsin is referring to the idea of structure and how I wouldn't. Iman is saying simple. I don't. I would beg to differ. I mean, poetry is not simple. It can. I mean, some poems can be simple, but for the most part, we say that poetry is difficult. Difficult in the sense that you would give it further thought. It's not about what meets the eye, obviously. Okay, you have to go beyond that, right? Mona is saying rhetorical, whatever that means. Okay. Rhythm and style, like Susan is saying. Yes, yes. Interesting. Interesting thoughts and interesting insights. Um, okay. Again, somebody's saying lines, and I don't know what he means by lines, which is fine. Yeah, I mean, it has to be made up of line. I haven't started yet. We're discussing. I'll make it bigger in a second. Okay. So again, what I'm trying to say is that you guys have now more knowledge than I myself do when it comes to poetry and what poetry means. And perhaps some of us are poets. Do we have people who write poetry in class? We're now 42. Don't we have one single poet? No poets? I haven't, Yasmin, I haven't started it yet. I'll make it big. Just we're simply discussing stuff. Don't 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 look at the screen yet. Okay, so no poet, No poets in class? You have never caught yourself writing poetry on any level? Okay, this is a bad sign. Perhaps we have short story writers, right? Or novelists. Yeah, Arabic or English. I mean, the experience is almost the same, whether you're writing in Arabic or in English. It is poetry after all. Reem is saying, I write poetry. That's good. Reem Al Aswad. She writes poetry. Okay, nice. Okay. If I understand you well, Anud is saying that still far from this. I mean, if it's not about age, if I understand you correctly, Al Anud. I mean, people start writing poetry whenever. Um, prison literature. You write prison literature? MashaAllah. You don't have to be skillful in writing poetry, by the way. You just write. You find yourself, I mean, having the talent, and then you start, and then you are on your way. I mean, over time, you can develop the skills. Okay. Lama Al Harbi, stop asking irrelevant questions. We're discussing more serious stuff. Okay. Forget about the group for a while and focus on what we're saying. Okay. Okay, Al Anud is saying that she's saying that she wishes that I mean, one day she will become a poet. Okay, again, it's not about wishing; it's about whether you're having the talent or not. Okay, just focus on what we're doing. Okay. Okay. So what do we have here? Like I said, I think this is big enough. I mean, the font. So reading poetry is part an attitude and part technique. And by reading poetry, we mean, of course, understanding poetry and appreciating it, right? Um, Provided that you also need to get rid of your preconceived ideas about poetry. I mean, there are, like I said, myths that people need to debunk when it comes to poetry. The idea that it doesn't lend itself to easy interpretation, it's difficult and challenging, and why would I read poetry that is so difficult and so challenging when I can have the same idea written in a short story or a novel? We don't handle stuff this way. Poetry is unique because of, we spoke about the musicality of poetry, the fact that it's so musical. Of all the other literary genres, poetry remains the most musical of all. So if you're into music, if you're into appreciating music, you're going to find poetry. I mean, helping with that. So again, when it's free of preconceived ideas about what poetry is or should be. Okay, so you approach poetry without preconceived ideas. Okay, you don't uh, take the impressions and experiences of others and internalize them as if they are yours. Every one of us has his own experience. Ah, yes. Yeah. Okay, let me ask. This is class 5 or 4? Okay, 4. Okay, so this is going to be Dr. Sam. And this is class 4. Yeah, and we're being recorded as usual. Okay. 4, it's 4. 4 weeks, it makes it 4. Of course, they are. Of course, and I keep sending the links. If every time I edit a class, I send the link. You have 3 classes on the group already. Okay, anyway. Okay. Again, I was talking about approaching poetry with an open mind, right? Open mind would mean uh, don't ask me questions that divert my attention away from what I'm talking about. Okay? Keep the questions until I finish. Okay. So again, poetry, guys. So the goal of careful reading is often to take up a question of meaning, an interpretive question that has more than one answer. You normally ask questions while reading poetry, obviously. And also, people read poetry more than once. Stop asking irrelevant questions, please. Okay? Let me focus. Okay? So, like I said, people need to read poems or the poem more than once. Okay? Again, because the language of poetry is different from the language of prose. You know what prose is? Prose would be the language that we speak in normal conversations, the language that you see in short stories and novels. Normally, in our daily conversations, in the prose that we're using is very accessible. Okay, it doesn't have deep and surface meaning like poetry. It's not. I'm not trying to say that it's not deep, because you can engage in deep conversations and you can use prose. I'm trying to say that it is normally not as perhaps uh, it doesn't have different levels of accessibility like we see in poetry. So poetry shouldn't be read the way we read a newspaper article, for example. It would need perhaps careful considerations that we've been talking about and that we're going to talk about. Again, the form is very important in poetry. Poetry is different when it comes to form. Spoke about the form or the shape of the poem and how condensed the lines are, and that would contribute towards the over meaning that the writer or the poet is trying to. So you cannot really separate the form from the content, from the messages that the poet is trying to kind of get across to us from within the poem. So, like we always say, the form can take you to the meaning. If you can think of, reaching certain conclusions about a poem without really caring about the form, this is not proper, and this is not correct. The form is one way of getting to the meaning. Okay, what do I mean by form? By form, of course, I mean how the poem looks like. I talk about rhythm and rhyme, right? I talk about the imagery that the poet is employing within the poem, the figurative language, right? But these are all, aspects of form that you should be on the look about when you read a poem. You cannot just ignore them and focus on meaning and trying to reach the meaning. Okay. Also, I would like to also talk about the idea that meaning can differ from one person to another, depending on your background. And I'll give you an example. You may read a poem in 2020, and then you go back to the poem after perhaps 2 or 3 years, or even when you graduate. When you have graduated, you have lots of experiences. You have been exposed to different perhaps genres. You have read so many and so much poetry. You're going to find that your reading of the poem is affected by the passage of time. In a positive sense, of course. In a positive sense, I mean You can relate whatever happens in the poem to your own personal experiences. You have read books, and those books have expanded your horizons, and you know more about the world, and you have your own worldview, and you have your own views about the world and what happens around. So the with passage of time, and this applies only to good poetry, you may have more ideas and more insights into the same poem. And this is one way of testing the quality of a poem. We said that a poem or a good poem would stand the test of time. So no matter how old it is, I mean, that wouldn't affect and compromise its quality. Again, we're focusing on the idea of prior assumptions. Prior assumptions means prior means before, and assumptions means ideas. So prior ideas or ideas that you come to the poem with. Yani if you get to know, for example, about the poet, and that he is perhaps you know you have read about his personal life, and there are things that you don't quite agree with in his personal life. You sometimes impose those things on the poem, and you read the poem from this perspective. This is wrong. This is doing the poet injustice. You're not doing yourself even justice if you kind of relate the biography of the poet to the poem. Um, Try to separate the poem from its author. Um, Sometimes you need to do that when we're talking about political poems. In this case, you need perhaps to know about the profile of the poet, whether he is politically committed or not, the age in which he was writing the poem. Other than that, and in 90% of the cases, you should separate and divorce the poem from its author or poet. You should be approaching the poem from a formal perspective or standpoint. Formal from form. You focus on what makes the poem a poem, not on the messages or the biographies or the biographical elements inside the poem. So most readers make three false assumptions when addressing an unfamiliar poem. Okay, and poetry is unfamiliar by definition, of course, right? The first is assuming that you should understand what they encounter on the first read. Okay, this is one of the myths, like I told you. No poem is accessible from the first time. Accessible, by accessible, I mean you can't grasp the meaning right from the first time. So, reading a poem and then not understanding it from the first time is fine and is okay. You don't just go and blame yourself, say, I don't understand. Perhaps the problem is with me. Or correspondingly, you can be saying that, okay, it's the poet is complicated and this guy is complex. No, it's not about that. You're not just approaching the poem the right way. I mean, give yourself the benefit of the doubt. Give the author the benefit of the doubt. And always remember that poetry is not as accessible as other genres. It's not a newspaper. Even newspaper articles have levels of meaning. Let alone poetry that is written in a certain way, and it's very condensed. Remember that the poet is not at liberty to write what he wants to write. He is limited and confined by space. Okay, I mean, poetry is not novels, long as they are. No, he is limited. He knows that this is poetry, and poetry is limited, like I said, is by space. For whatever other people say in hundreds of pages, a poet has to say in 6 or 10 or more lines. See where the challenge lies with the poet. So you are supposed to understand that, to understand the condensed language when you read a poem. Okay, so this wouldn't happen, and the poem is not going to unlock itself easily from the first time. Give yourself a break, give yourself the benefit of the doubt, give the author the benefit of the doubt, and just deal with it in a relaxed way. So if you don't understand it the first time, never mind. Okay, just go and read it again. You don't understand it second time, it's okay. Poetry has an element and a measure of philosophy to it. And philosophy is about saying things in an usual things, but in a non-conventional way, right? Allahu Akbar. Do I make sense? Okay. So like we said, the second is assuming that the poem. So the first one of the myths that we're trying to debunk would be uh, the fact that you should understand what you read from the first time. No, this is not uh, the case. And if they don't understand that they think that something is wrong with them or with the poet or with the poem. The second is assuming that the poem is a kind of code. So it's a code that each detail corresponds to one. So you're familiar with the idea of code, and with codes you have one-to-one correspondence. So you give me a code and I give you a meaning. You give me another code and no, it doesn't go this way. This absolute 100% correspondence between meaning and the words on the page does not exist. Okay, there is obviously more to a poem than the literal meaning of the words on the page. The third would be assuming that the poem can mean anything readers want it to mean. Yeah, this is also twisting the poem so that it can serve our own purposes. No, you don't twist or manipulate the poem to mean what you want it to mean. There is obviously a limit to that. Okay, but these are some, like I said, assumptions, false as they are, that you should get yourself get rid of before you approach a poem. Again, the focus would be on the idea that poetry is not, uh, um, you know, is not as easy as prose in terms of accessibility. Again, because of the challenges that a poet meet. What are these challenges? The fact that he, whatever other people in other genres say in hundreds of pages, he has to say in a stanza or two or three, right? And even some poets are aware of this dilemma, if you like. I mean, the dilemma that lots of people are saying that I mean, we don't understand your poetry. Why are you writing like this? Why don't you write like other non-poetry writers? I mean, why do we have to go the extra mile so that we can understand you? Okay, so one of those poets who actually spoke about this difficulty is William Carlos Williams, and he wrote a verse addressed to his wife in the poem January Morning. You hate whom? And this is what he said, addressing his wife in the poem. He says, "All this was for you, old woman. I wanted to write a poem that you would understand. For what good is it to me if you can't understand it? But you got to try hard." Of course, the way I'm saying it is not poetic at all. By the way, reading poetry and reciting poetry has rules and regulations that people also have to uh, exert. Okay, all this was for you, old woman. I wanted to write a poem that you would understand. For what good is it to me if you can't understand it? But you got to try hard. He is acknowledging what everybody is saying about poetry, that it can sometimes be difficult to understand. Okay? And he is also um, again, again, I cannot help but look at the chat area. Okay? Please stop asking each other questions that have nothing to do with what we're doing. Okay, I'm trying to keep focused here. Don't make me or don't get my attention diverted away from what I'm trying to focus on. Again, two things William Carlos Williams is doing. He is acknowledging the fact that poetry is sometimes difficult. And the other point would be that there is a role that the reader has to play. What is it that you should do as a reader? You should also try to understand. You don't just read a poem from the first time and then judge it, saying, no, I don't understand it. It's either because I don't understand in the first place or the poet has issues. No, it's not about that. You need to approach poetry with an open mind. Open mind means that you give the poet and the poem itself the benefit of the doubt. How do you do that? You read it more than once. Okay? So again, we have a poet. He is telling us, we acknowledge, we poets acknowledge that poetry can sometimes difficult, but we also and in the same breath, we're trying to appeal to readers to walk the extra mile and try to perhaps read more, understand more, perhaps look up the words that we're using in the dictionary. Okay. So William admits in these lines that poetry is often difficult. He also suggested that a poet depends on the efforts of a reader. Again, the reader is very important. Somehow a reader must complete what the poet has begun. Okay? Again, it's like, how I look at poetry normally. I look at poetry as perhaps a riddle or a puzzle. And what is it that you're doing all the time? You're trying to piece the clues together so that at the end you come up with a solution for the puzzle, if you like. It doesn't get that difficult with poetry, to be honest. And saying that it is a puzzle even would be too far, right? Again, poetry is about the experience and the habit of reading poetry. So your first experience with poetry is way different from your second, from your third. So uh, reading poetry has to become a habit, and if it becomes a habit, you now know how to handle the poem. It becomes a skill that you develop as you proceed and as you go along. Okay, so again, poetry gives or lends itself to interpretations in so many different ways. Like we said, you would focus on the form, and you read the form, and you look at the rhyme scheme, the rhythm, the meter, the figurative language, the imagery. When you put all of them together, you can have meaning. You can have a meaning that is again poetic, because poetry is different. Again, the musicality of a poem is key to any to the understanding also of poetry. So poems speak to us in many different ways. Though their forms may not always be direct or narrative, you don't have poetry is not, you don't have narrative poetry. Or if you do have narrative poetry, this is like it accounts for yeah, perhaps 5% of the whole body of poetry. Poetry is reflective, is descriptive, is argumentative. So you don't have narrative poems if you're expecting some. Narrative poems means that you have a poem that tells you a story. We don't have that anymore. Again, because telling a story in a poem would take space and would take time, and these are things that poems uh, um, do not normally give. So again, the idea of literalness, the idea of directness does not exist in poetry. There is, like I always say, deep meaning that you have to be aware of. What would you do in a poem? You look for what? You look for techniques of word and line arrangement, sound, rhythm, right? Again, these things multiply the meaning and expand the meaning. These are things that you wouldn't see in short stories. Of course, we talk about style in short stories, but the focus is not as necessary. With poetry, it's everything. I mean, rhythm and rhyme, and the arrangement of lines, and the effect of all of these things is uh, paramount in poetry. In other genres, yeah, it is there, but with in a lesser degree. So what clues would we have in a poem that can help us perhaps understand it and appreciate it? Maha is asking, musical effect in poem is only linked to the rhythm. The rhythm horizontally, and the rhyme, when lines rhyme together, when you have the same sound at the end of lines. Yeah, Maha. Again, um, I was talking about what uh, leads you or takes you to the ultimate meaning of a poem. Let me ask, do you have an ultimate meaning for a poem? Ultimate meaning means that you have a final meaning, that you have a meaning that everybody agrees on. Obviously, no. You don't have an ultimate meaning. Again, like I said, people approach poems with different backgrounds and different experiences. And like I gave you the example at the beginning, a poem can mean something today, and it can mean something perhaps in 5 years. Okay. So does it mean that you would have, everyone will have his own unique meaning of a poem? No, of course we're going to agree on a minimum understanding of the poem. We agree on things, but I'm talking about the details and how you would understand the poem, because we normally link the poem to our own experiences. Look, and you all have read, and I assume and trust that you have read the road not taken so many times. Look at how you read it when you first read it, and then perhaps after 2 or 3 times, because I'm sure that you have read it so many times because it's part of the TMA. Let's look at how different the meaning is. At the first, yani when you read it at the first time, you would have a meaning, and then you read it, you come up with perhaps a different interpretation. Does this happen with you? I'm asking you. All poetry is tricky, Yamaha. If it's not tricky, it's not poetry. But tricky in a positive sense, of course. You wouldn't like it if it's not tricky, Yamaha. Okay, if you get what I mean. Maisa is saying the phrases. I don't know what she means by the phrases. Again, I'm asking you about your experience with the road not taken. Yeah, ambiguity is also a trademark of poetry. If it's not ambiguous, if it lends itself to easy interpretation, it wouldn't be called poetry, Emma. Abdul Wahab is saying that it's hazy, which means that I mean he's trying to say that it's perhaps confusing and contradictory and blurry, right? Okay, I'm asking you. I'm asking you about. I'm asking you a specific question. I would like to listen to what you have to say about the road not taken in terms of meaning. Tell me, and I would like you to share your experience if you still recollect when you first read the poem, and then perhaps after you read it twice and three times and four times. Maha is saying that by the third reading I start to understand. You're talking in general terms, or you're talking about the road not taken, Yamaha? Everybody, I would like you to. By the way, the mic is enabled, and if you have like a headset and a mic, you can always use it. No, this is not the right approach, Yamaha, right? I told you whether we're dealing with novel, any piece of literature, you shouldn't start with the secondary sources. You start with the primary sources, which means the poem or the short story. You try to understand as much as you can. You try to deconstruct the poem or the short story, and then later, much later, you go back to the critic's opinions, right? Well, you haven't given yourself, you fell into the trap of doubting yourself and your abilities, Yamaha. Okay, I'm sure this is what happened with you. You thought, no, it's difficult, I wouldn't understand it, I don't understand poetry. Okay, let me go to the secondary sources and look at what critics are saying. So you're not giving yourself the benefit of the doubt. Okay, let's have somebody else. Maisa. Maisa said that I read it several times to understand it, and until now I think it has more than one meaning. That this is the point. Okay, we agree on the minimum when it comes to meaning, right? And then everyone can come up with his own meaning within set parameters. You can't talk. I mean, just say anything and say this is the meaning that I got. No, there are of course, things to consider. Al-Anud is saying, I didn't understand the poem in the first time, then in third time I started to understand. Again, it started to give itself, I mean, to lend itself to interpretation. Al-Anud says, but I need more reading, I guess. Yes. Okay. You don't just read the poem and you expect the poem to open its arms for you just like that. So you read it first, when you read it for the first time, for quick impressions about the poem. That's fine. But when you read it for the second time, what happens if you stumble into a difficult vocab item? What do you do when you stumble into a difficult what we call diction or a vocab item. You just ignore it, or you go and look it up. You go and look it up, right? So when you have looked all the difficult vocab items up, that can help, right? Sahar is saying, firstly, it wasn't clear at all, but by repeating it, it started to be clearer. But still, I need to read again and again. I find poetry very difficult. I don't like it. Okay. It's okay. I mean, it's a matter of preference, and it's a matter of interest. So other people may like it. You don't like it. It's okay. But we're not here to kind of talk about liking or not liking. We're talking about knowing how to approach a poem critically. Okay. So you may not like it, but you have the ability to understand it and to analyze it. So it's analysis and understanding that we're talking about. Okay. Okay. Yasmin is saying, I read the critics as an eye-opening because the road not taken was a bit confusing. Again, I'm stressing the fact that it would need reading, and it would need patience. Again, it's not an article or a news headline in a newspaper. This is poetry. So condensed. I mean, the lines are unusual in their arrangement. The lines can be very short. They can't be even lines. Sometimes you have phrases. Okay, so whatever we remember when we speak about writing and proper writing, if you're writing an essay, sometimes your teacher says, listen, this is not a full sentence. This sentence does not make sense, right? So we wouldn't tolerate it in a writing class, but in poetry, this is part of perhaps the beauty of the whole thing. That from a phrase that is otherwise looked at as incorrect, you have meaning. Okay. Okay. Again, we're all agreed on the idea that poetry cannot be read once. It has to be read more than once. Okay, you read it for the first time in order to collect and gather impressions about the poem, and then you read it again. When you read it again and you meet difficult vocab items, you have to look them up, and then you put all of that together, and it's going to open for you. And the more you read, the more the understanding, like I said. And then finally, you go and check your intuitions about the poem against those of the critics. You yourself, you are a critic, mind you. You have mind enough, you have a sense of appreciation enough that can qualify you to judge a poem. It's only the experience that would separate you from other critics. Okay. Okay. So do we have a recipe that people can follow so that um, they can eventually um, understand a poem? Do we have a list of questions that you may? Yeah, over experience, people started to come up with a list, a checklist that you implement after you have finished. Did I understand this way? Did I look at the title? Did I look at the imagery? So these are questions that you ask without knowing that you're asking. Okay, so somehow you can the questions can be one of these. Who is the speaker? Who is the speaker? The persona in the poem, and we also need to kind of not to confuse the speaker with the poet himself. You can have a speaker or a persona. Okay. What circumstances give rise to the poem? I wouldn't consider this question because, like I said, it's against my approach. My approach would be to focus on the poem itself. Okay. What situation is presented in the poem? Who or what is the audience? If I can detect that from the words and the diction, if I can detect who he is talking to, perhaps it's a love poem where the persona is addressing his lady love. You can almost tell. I mean, why would I have to know about these things? Because it can make all the difference in delivering the meaning. What is the tone? The tone and the mood, the tone of the speaker. I mean, you can always tell whether he is um, joyful, happy, criticizing, scathing, right? Critical. What form, if any, does the poem take? Spoke about forms, and there are for what we call formulaic uh, forms. Formulaic means that you have a form, and you as a poet is following the form. Like when you write a sonnet, for example. Sonnet is a poem of 14 lines, for example. So sometimes you have poets who write using certain poetic traditions. You have to be aware of that. Sometimes it's free verse. I mean, he just write and he or she does not stick to one single form. How is form related to content? I said you can, in poetry especially, you cannot separate form from content because form helps you kind of figure out what the content is about. Is sound an important active element of the poem? Yeah, you need to also check those musical elements that I spoke about and how they contribute towards achieving or delivering the meaning that the writer or the poet has in mind. Does the poem spring from an identifiable historical moment? This is also biographical and history, and we would keep it to things political and stuff. Does the poem speak from a specific culture? Yeah, sometimes the poem tells you that this is, for example, this is a Japanese poem because it is written in a certain way. This is an Arabic poem because, in classical Arabic poetry, you normally have a line, and this line is divided. You can call it two lines that are kind of facing each other, or one line and it's split into two, right? So it's different. It's different from poetry written in English, where you have one line and you don't have any splits, right? Does the poem have its own vernacular? Vernacular means, does it use the local language? What kind of language? When we speak, for example, about poetry or Arabic poetry, you have varieties of Arabic poetry. You have classical poetry, classical Arabic poetry, where the poets are using classical Arabic. And you also have different types of Arabic poetry. For example, people in Syria, for example, when they write poetry, they either write classical Arabic poetry or they can use their local language. People in Sudan, people in Egypt, for example, they can use their own local language. So you need to spot that, right? So does the poem use imagery to achieve a particular? Absolutely. This is I mean, we shouldn't ask this question because poetry is about imagery. So imagery has to be there, but how imagery is twisted and manipulated so that it can reach a certain effect, this is the big question. So if the poem is a question, what is the answer? And if the poem is an answer, what is the question? Right? Look at the title and see if it can give you suggestions about what is happening or what is going to happen in the poem. Okay. So does the poem use unusual words or use words in an unusual way? Yeah, of course. This is poetry. You use unusual words and you use words in unusual way. I mean, the second option is more like poetry, where you have the same words that we use in normal conversations, but they are used and arranged in an unusual way, and that would leave you perhaps stunned and astonished. And this is actually one way of judging how powerful a poet is. Okay, do we make sense? Do I make sense so far? Again, we come back to the idea of text and context. The text would be the poem, right? So what is con when I say context? When I say con would mean give you the associations of uh, neighboring and surroundings. So con means whatever you bring to the poem, your own experiences would be context. I mean the views and the opinions of other people, secondary sources would be context. Looking at the biography of the poet and what kind of life he used to lead, that would be context. The biography of the poem, I mean the age itself in which the poem was written, this is all context. So uh, how much context do we need? Remember, I told you don't need a context when you're approaching the poem for the first time. Why? Because if you get to know um, about the poem from outside the poem, this is going to affect your understanding and your appreciation of the poem. Actually, it's going to leave you like lazy. You don't want to do anything. You just want to go and check what other people are saying about the poem, and then you read the poem. And of course, I mean, you have the idea of reading about the poem before reading the poem is a mistake. Okay, so what is it that we should do? What are our priorities? You start reading the poem, and then when you have exhausted all the possible means with the poem in terms of understanding, in terms of analyzing, you go to the critics and you go to the age and check what the age. You go to the biography of the poet, but not until and unless you have read the poem very thoroughly, very closely. Okay? Okay. This is one of the poems that we're dealing with. Um, I chose not to start with the the road not taken because I thought it would be very repetitive. We'll have it in a minute, but let's start with something fresh and then move to. Okay, this is a poem, right? Uh, I, I would like you to look at it. You have it in front of your eyes, and I would like you to jot down. You have to have like a notebook or something, and I would like you to jot down impressions about the poem. I mean, give me whatever comes to your mind about the poem. Don't organize your thoughts. Just jot down whatever your mind would give you about the poem. And I'll give you 3 minutes for that. Okay? Can we do that? Hello, can you hear me? Okay, you guys have 3 minutes to write down your impressions. I mean, whatever comes to your mind about this poem. So how can you do that unless you have read the poem? So you'll have to read the poem, right? I let me remind. I wouldn't be surprised if you take more than the 3 minutes that I asked you. Again, because poetry is different in its reading. You're not reading a paragraph in a newspaper. The language is so condensed. Whatever is contained here in meaning can be expressed in hundreds of words in novels. Hence the challenge that the poet meets. I quite appreciate and I understand that people may take time reading and gathering impressions about a poem. It is very healthy that people spend time, quality time reading a poem. So it's nothing that you should feel bad about. No. The more time, the more understanding, the more appreciation. You're doing a good job. In the same breath, you shouldn't be spending the rest of your life on a poem, right? Okay. Any luck? Any luck with the poem? Wait, I think. Wait, just give me a second. I think I'm missing something. Let me start with the threads. Okay. Okay. So we're going to start with um, okay. So Mona is saying the smile on the face hides pain inside the soul. Good. Yasmin is saying, am I the only one who liked the rhythm? There is Maisa is saying there is inner suffering. Maha is saying life would force us sometimes to wear a mask to hide our true feelings and pretend. Okay. Um Sahar is saying there is an internal struggle between the poet and himself. It seems to be that the speaker is unhappy with society because people hiding the true feelings. Al Anud is saying the poem presents the personal person's life. Sometimes we have to hide our feelings. Features do not represent us, Reem is saying. Suzanne is saying, other than hiding true emotions with masks and not revealing the inner feelings to public. I wonder why he says we instead of I. This means he is talking on behalf of a group. Yeah, that's a good reading. I already read that before. Okay, no problem. Remember, Maisa is saying that I read it already before the class. Yes, but if you read it again, you're going to come up with more meanings. I promise you. Like I said, remember when I said that you read a poem and then after a while you read it again, you come up with ideas, right? Muhammad is saying it conceals the pain and anger behind the mask. That's a good reading. On He speaks on behalf of all humanity. This is what Suzanne is saying. Yes. May Maisa is saying it is about racism. I don't see any racism. Yeah, Maisa. Nagwa is saying smile doesn't always mean happiness. Sometimes it is just a hiding mask for sad feelings. Yeah, very good readings of the poem. Again, and remember, you have read the poem only once, and you came up, except for Maisa, because she said that she has read it already. Um, I'll tell you why, Maha. Maha is saying, but this poem is way easier than the road not taken. No, it's not that it is easier or something. It's because your first experience landed you with a poem that is a little bit philosophical. So we shouldn't have started with you with the road not taken. We should have given you an accessible poem so that you can appreciate poetry, and so that you wouldn't have bad impressions about poetry. And then when we come to poems that are a little bit challenging, you would exercise patience, because you know that when you understand it, you're going to like it. It's about the approach. It's about the fact that we started with a bit philosophical poem. Are you getting my idea? Okay, this one is no different. Okay, and it's easier to you because you have been trained already. Okay, with the road not taken, you got the shock from the road not taken, if I may say that, and then now you're getting used to reading poetry that is not as easy as other genres. Okay. طيب. Remember, you read the poem once, right? You read the poem only once. Sahar is saying, is it normal that I studied poetry in 3 different languages, Arabic, English, and French, and still I found many difficulties? Yes, yes, Sahar, it's normal and it's natural and it's even healthy. Uh, Poetry, if you lose the amazement that you get when you approach poetry, it's not poetry. Every time you read a poem, regardless of the language, you get new sensations and new ideas and new meaning. If you lose that, this is not poetry. Are you getting the idea? Don't stop. Don't stop. I'm saying that poetry shouldn't fail to impress and even confuse you. If it doesn't do that, it ceases to be poetry. It stops to be poetry. It's about the amazement and the astonishment that you get from reading a poem. Okay? So if every time you read it with new sensations, provided that you keep an open mind, of course, and you don't just go and complain and say, I don't understand poetry. Poetry is not for me. Let me think of something else. No. Okay? طيب. You haven't answered my question. And my question was basically about how many times you have read the poem. So did you read it once? If you have read it once, say so. Okay, Sahar read it twice. Haya once. So obviously most of us read it once. Okay. Abdul Muhsin read it once. Okay. Maisa read it. Yeah, and we're going to count the 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 one time that you did. I mean, before class, right? Okay. So most of us read it once. Okay. Can we read it again? And let's have this exercise. I would like, whether you have read it twice or, yeah, especially those who read it once. I would like you to read it for the second time, and I would like you to tell me how different the second reading is from the first time. Can we do that? Yalla, go again, and I would like you to read it for the second time if this is your second time, or for the third time. And I would like you to make comparisons between the first reading and the second reading. Give me your impressions about the poem when you have read it for the second or the third time. Go ahead. You guys have 2 minutes. Okay. So let's collect impressions about the second or the third reading. And we're going to start with Haya. Haya said, I understood the meanings of words more and feelings more deeply. That's interesting. That's a good conclusion. Sahar is saying we gain more terms, we have open and wide understanding. We also may get new initiative points which are not appearing from the first. That's a very good conclusion. Okay, which proves my point, right? My point was about the fact that the more you read, the more understanding you get. Let's look at what Maha is saying. Maha is saying, I paid attention this time. Wait. To this line. Why should the world be overwise? This is impressive. Yeah, see, Maha. Susan is saying, I noticed some words that I didn't pay attention to before. That's good. That's good. Um, okay. We're waiting for more impressions, perhaps. You know what the problem was? When you first read the poem, you approached the poem the way you do with prose, with a short story or a novel or an article in a newspaper. No. Like I said, poetry is different. Reading poetry is a totally different experience. Right? Again, it doesn't lend itself to easy interpretation. You have to exercise patience. You have to exercise caution even. The arrangement of words is different, right? The words are put in an unusual way. They are arranged in an unusual way. You wouldn't see them uh, uh, operating this way in a short story, for example. Al-Anud, okay, Maisa is saying the more we read it, the more we understand. That's good. That's a good conclusion. Yes. Al-Anud is saying, I feel that I'm closer to the speaker's feeling. That's good. Reem is saying, the decisions made by the world have cost us our tears and it's not fair. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Maha is saying that he is raising the same questions that she raised. I don't know what these questions that you have raised, Yamaha, but it's okay. Okay, that's good. That's good. Okay. No, don't cry yet. Okay, so Reem is saying that she will cry now. No. Okay. طيب. That's good. If it triggers thoughts and ideas at the back of your mind, the poet is obviously doing a good job, right? and we are making a good job. We're doing a good job, I'm sorry, by being very close to the poem, reading it more than once, right? In this way, the poem can unlock itself easily. Yes. Okay. Um, okay. It wouldn't be enough to collect and gather impressions. There is obviously more to a poem than the impressions that you get reading it once and twice. Your main job would be to look at the poem and what makes the poem, the formal aspects in a poem, and see how they contribute towards the overall message that the writer is trying to. So there is always time for the formal aspects: rhyme, rhythm, imagery, figurative language. Okay, this is what counts eventually. Yeah, figurative language, imagery, metaphors, right? You have to look at that. I leave. I'm not going to address this part yet. Okay, I leave this poem and move to another poem, and next time we will go back. We are going to revisit this poem, and in the meantime, after you finish class, I would like you to address yourself to the formal aspects of the poem. And next time, I would like you to get yourself ready to talk about the formal aspects and how the formal aspects contribute to the meaning. Yeah, Maisa is saying that we have repetition and we have lots of things. Okay, can we do that? Okay, fine. Okay. Remember, I said that we'll go back to the poem next time. Let's move to the road not taken. Let's keep an open mind and read it. Of course, this is going to be your third or fourth, no problem. I would like you to read this poem with fresh eyes, as if you're reading it for the first time, and see what comes out. See whether we're going to have new sensations, whether we're going to change our minds. And some of you are feeling negative about the poem. They feel it's not good, it's not, I don't know, right? It's complicated. But I would like you to read it with fresh eyes and with an open mind. And let's see what will come out. Okay? You guys have 2 minutes. Let me know when you have finished reading it. Okay, are you done reading it? Okay. Any new sensations that you come out with? Does it does it feel different? I mean, reading it today, does it feel different? In what sense? Al-Anud says yes, and Abdul Wahab says no. Okay, let's focus on what Al-Anud. What kind? How different is it? I mean, the reading this time around. Yasmin is saying it's easier to understand. Yasmin, let me ask you this question. Is it because you have read it so many times, or is it because perhaps the approach is different this time around? You're taking into consideration what we said about reading a poem. Al-Anud is saying, I was confused about some point. Now I feel it's clearer. Yasmin is saying, because I read so I read it so many times. Muhammad is saying, it talks about our choices in life and what would happen if we opt for the opposite way. Okay. And Mohsin is, it has several meanings. Yeah, it has several meanings. I am focusing on the perhaps the fresh meanings that you may have come out with today, and if what we have said about reading poems and approaching them have made any difference. Okay. um, Maha, you should be reading the poem with the idea of ambiguities fresh in your mind. I said the ambiguities will never stop, okay? Because you have an understanding of the poem that would perhaps reflect your background, your understanding of things, your worldview. So you shouldn't, we don't have 100 correspondence when it comes to understanding something. Total agreement is a myth. Unanimity is a myth. Make no mistake about it. Susan is saying, although the words are simple, yet the meaning is deeper than I can think of. Choices and confusion, mainly what I understood in general. Yes. Okay, good. Okay. So uh, we have levels, right? When you approach a poem, you have levels. You have the literal, right? Surface meaning level, and you have the deep meaning. So let's talk about the surface meaning. What meets the eye? What immediately meets the eye? So when you read the poem and when you look at its surface meaning, you're divorcing it from its philosophical meaning. Let's focus, let's assume that there are two levels, okay? A literal level and a philosophical level. So what would be the literal level that meets the eye? We're having an individual, can be me or you or anybody else for that matter, okay, and he is walking down a path, and at one point it would diverge, okay. So this is perhaps a new road to him. He doesn't know which course of action to take. Should he go this path or that one, right? But this is the literal meaning, right? And then eventually you have to take one of them, right? Whether the path that you're following is the correct one or not, this is obviously not the question. The question is about making the choice at one point, right? And he did make a choice. Make no mistake about it. This is the literal meaning. This is the surface level meaning. Okay? Right. Let's go deeper than that. Okay, let's go to the philosophical meaning, the deeper meaning. The deeper meaning would be about choices that we make in life. Okay, I'm sure you were met or hit rather with this idea of choices when you first joined the Arab Open University. You finished your high school and you have different choices. Should I join the Arab Open University or go to King Saud University or Al Yamama University? I don't know about other universities. King Abdulaziz University if you're in Jeddah. Travel and study abroad. Go back to my country if I happen to be I happen not to be perhaps Saudi. Go back to my country and study there in university. But these are choices, right? So this is, and choices entail are they involve dilemmas. Sometimes the choice in and of itself is a dilemma. You cannot make up your mind. You don't know what is best for you. Okay? You don't just choose and hope for the best. No. You think and rethink and then perhaps consult other people, and it's not easy to take a decision, especially if this decision will have consequences, right? Let's talk about your let's kind of make connections between the poem and its talk about choices and your choices. Let's talk about the decision to join the Arab Open University. Obviously you had a number of choices, right? So those who have choices, let's talk about or address those who have choices or had choices at the time. Can somebody perhaps share his or her experience with us? Okay, Reem, Dima. Can somebody volunteer and tell us about it all? Okay. Okay, so Dima perhaps wants to say something. Dima, you can talk if you have a mic.
Hello?
Yeah, hi. Go ahead, Dima. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Ah, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah,
We were talking about choices,
yes,
right?
yes, right.
Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can't hear you. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you. Yes, you're doing a good job. Go ahead. Talk, talk, talk.
Okay.
Hello.
Yes, doctor.
Yes, I mean, you asked to
Yeah,
you
finally
raised your
it worked.
hand. Would you
Yeah, I
like?
raised my hand to share.
Yeah, go ahead. We're all ears. Talk, talk.
When I finished my high school,
Hmm.
there was a lot of choices to me, either to travel to my origin country, Jordan,
Hmm.
or stay here with my family. And also I have already applied to the Imam University, as the Imam University, I mean, and I was accepted to the Science and Technology major, but I didn't want to study like science. So after maybe 1 month of thinking about this of a big or a very nerve-wracking decision,
Yes.
because it's like the whole life, my whole life is dependent on this decision.
Yes.
So I decided to stay with my family and join the Open University and study English language, as English is an international language and I may have a lot of opportunities if I study language. Actually, I never think about it before because I was in scientific field, not literature and languages at all. But this is what happens with me, and I'm happy with my choice right
Yes.
now.
We're so happy that you are with
I
us
was
here,
thinking
Dima.
if I choose to go to Jordan, I will be unable to see my family, uh,
And your family means a lot to you. It
especially
seems.
with this. Yes,
Yes.
with this situation. You see,
Yes. Mm.
everyone is trying to go back to their families, and thank God this was my decision.
Yeah. Okay. You're doing a good job.
Yes,
We're so
that's
proud
it.
of you, Yadima. Thank you so much. Thank you for your input. As you can see, I mean,
You're
Dima had
welcome.
more than one choice, and obviously the Arab Open University was not her first choice. Um, you see how difficult it is. You see how you can connect experiences that you have in your life with poems. That's why we use expressions like I identify with the persona of the poem, or I identify with the main character in short stories. It's about seeing a link somehow, a connection between what you read on the page and your own life. And uh, this is what successful reading of poems and literature in general is all about. It's about trying to establish connections, logical ones, between your own life and your own experiences and what you read on the page. Um, yeah, Dima did a good job. I like what she said, and I like the way she said. I mean, mashallah, her English is excellent. Okay, so again, let's go back to the idea of choices, because obviously the poem is about a choice, and also about uh, typical of human beings. You are never happy with the choice that you make, even if the choice is or has been the best choice that you have ever taken. You still feel that perhaps the second choice would have made a difference, right? But this is what make the message of the poem universal. Universal in the sense that it applies to you, me, Dima, and pretty much everybody else, right? I'm not sure I understand. Sahar is saying not always. Not always what? Perhaps she needs to explain. Al Anud is saying yes, I will regret why I didn't choose the first choice. Yeah, it's human nature normally. Uh, because you were not given the opportunity, of course, to see your life in the yani, and what direction it takes in the other choice, you keep thinking, what if I had taken the other choice, or the I have made the other decision, right? uh, yes. But it shouldn't be a pattern. Yani if you have taken a decision, you have to come to terms with the decision and with the choice. You shouldn't be every time, every now and then, blaming yourself for taking this or that. Just stick with the decision, be happy with it, and that would be it. Somebody wants to contribute something? Um, okay. So again, we're going to go back to the poem next time, and I would like to now shift gears and move to the short stories. Okay. So what short stories do we have? We have two fresh short stories. One of them is, remember, uh, Dead Man's Bath by Shinwa Shibi, right? Okay. Let's listen to what Sahar is saying. Sahar is saying, it's not always you will regret your decision. Maybe God will give you many signs that you are going on the right thing. It's not about regretting. It's about this what if kind of thing. What if I have taken the other choice? It doesn't have to be all the time regretting a choice that you have taken. Remember, I said that it can be the best choice that you have ever made. Okay? طيب. Okay. So the two stories that we have today are just as amazing. Do I have them? I should, right? This one is funny. Okay. So, Dead Man's Bath by Shinwa Ashebe. And Shinwa Ashebe, for those who, I mean, I shouldn't spoil it. I'm saying I am, the problem is with me is that I am not practicing what I preach. In the sense that I tell you not to look at the name of the author and not to get affected by who the author is. And I was starting to talk about Achebi and how important he is and stuff like that, right? I shouldn't be doing that. I mean, next time I promise you I'm going to even delete and drop the name of the author, right? So Dead Man's Bath is the short story that we have. It is by Chinua Achebe. Okay. So forget about Chinua Achebe for a minute. Okay. So those who have read the poem, I mean the short story, if you have read the short story, give me five. Give me five, please, if you have read the short story. Okay. So my sat did. شروق. Yes. العنود. آلاء. آلاء ناصر. مها. Mona Saleh, and Haya Abdul Wahab. Yeah, very good. Yeah, nice. Okay, good luck with the TMA. Reem is 55. I don't know. 55 means that she has read it perhaps more than once. Okay, it's okay. You need to read them, yeah, Abdul Mohsin. Okay. طيب. احنا يعني unfortunately we're going to spoil it for Abdul Mohsin because he hasn't read it, and having read it and I mean and hearing us talk about it will spoil it. So when he goes and read it, I mean a lot has been forgone for him. I mean the excitement and the suspense and all these kinds of things. But make sure, ya Abdul Mohsen, that you read the short stories so that we don't spoil them for you. Okay? Anyway, so dead Dead Man Bath. Yeah, everybody's busy with the TMA. Everybody's busy. So should we leave everything and focus on the TMA? No, we shouldn't. Um, there is obviously more to the course, especially this course, than just the TMA. As you can see, the course is practical. We're trying to teach you stuff that will help you in other courses. How to analyze poems, how to analyze short stories and novels. Okay, good. So let's do. Mishal, long time no here. Where have you been? I haven't heard you in perhaps this was. I mean, last time you perhaps you were not there last time and you haven't spoken today. Anyway, um, impressions. Let's talk about it. Okay. With the TMA. Okay. So impressions about the short story. Ideas. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about it, everyone. Okay. Maisa is saying amazing, and she has I mean obviously a lot of explaining to do in a minute. You can't just say amazing or wonderful and stop. You'll have to kind of provide reasons why you think it is, and I'm sure Maisa has a lot to say. Okay, who else? Okay. Al-Anud is saying, okay, wait. Why it present a good life lesson? I don't change the tradition. All the people will turn against. No, no, will be in the losing side or on the losing side. Maya is saying it wasn't surprising that the school wasn't progressing at the end of the story. We now know why. Al-Anud, I like it for this reason. Okay. Okay, so we have, what Al Anud says is something, and what Maha is says is something. Maha is obviously is all for progress and for new ideas, while Al Anud, it seems that she is all for tradition and not changing tradition or not challenging them, which is good. See the kind of ideas that stories like this can trigger at the back of our minds. Okay. Okay, is it relevant to what we're doing? Yeah, Dima. If it's procedural, we keep it until the end. Arij is saying it's an interesting story. Talks about different, I don't know, different what. She stopped. Okay. Okay, so what is the theme? If you can sum up the idea and capsulize it in a theme, what would be the theme of the short story? What is the theme? Yeah, to say conflict and full stop wouldn't be enough because conflict exists everywhere. You need to be more specific. Yeah, excellent, ya Maisa. That this is well put. Maisa is saying there is a conflict or the conflict between modernity and traditions. Yeah, that's good. New ideas and traditions. Good. Conflict with society. It doesn't capture the real meaning of the short story Al-Anud. Okay, so you have a clash between old and new ideas, between native culture and modernity, if you like. Do you agree with these themes or with these labels? Al-Anud is saying conflict between traditions and new ideas. That's good. Excellent. Okay. Okay. Let's analyze it. Let's deconstruct it, if you like. Okay. To spend your life for a reason do you think that most important? Okay. Okay. So what are the elements of a short story as seen in this short story? So let's start with setting. Setting is time and place. Give me clues about the setting and the time. Establish the time and place of the short story. Okay, so the place is somewhere in Africa. Russia is saying we have a date. It says 1949. More specifically, Maisa is saying that it can be the winter or spring of 1949. Yeah, somewhere in Africa, perhaps in a village. Yes. Al Anud is saying more specifically it would be January. Okay, so people are at school. School is operating, and we need to go back perhaps to this African country and get to know when when their school starts and when it ends, right? Okay, nice. Maisa is saying it can be Africa because Upi is an African name. Okay. Okay. And even the school has a name that we can perhaps locate if we check Google Maps or something. It can have realistic existence. Maisa is saying that the description of rain and flowers gives the hint for time. Yes. Al Anud is saying that Nudmi is a name of gorilla. Okay, not that I know of. That's good. Okay, fine. That's good. So how active is the setting? Remember, we at one point we said that some settings are just there because there have to be a setting, right? There has, they kind of create a background for the events, and some settings are so dynamic and so active. So what do you think of the setting, especially uh, uh, the the place, the setting when it comes to place? Do you think it is active? Does it help in furthering the action of the novel like it did in other short stories? No, Russia is saying it's not. She didn't feel that it is active enough. Okay. Okay. I'll give you a test or a trick that you can apply so that you can see whether the setting is essential and active or not. Okay. Can you think of this short story with a different setting? Can you take the setting of this short story and give it to another perhaps short story and take this other short story setting and put it here? Is the is this specific setting essential, in other words? Okay. So can you separate the setting or the setting of this particular short story from whatever was unfolding in the short story, in other words? Okay. Yes, okay. Let's move to the characters. Do we have so many characters? No, we can't have so many characters because it's a short story, right? Okay. Okay, let's talk about the main character. So do we have a name for the main character? Upi, yes. Let's make a characterization out of him. Characterization means that you're going to give me a profile of the character. Upi and Nancy. Nancy is obviously his wife, right? Let's look at Upi, and perhaps you can make a profile out, for him. Yeah, Russia is saying he's young. He is married. Okay. Let's look at his mind. Think about his mind. Yeah, Maisa is saying he is a young man and he is full of passion for work. He has, what kind of ideas does he have? Conservative, traditional ideas, or liberal, new ideas? Yeah, he has an open mind. He's outspoken and modern. He has, or he is embracing new liberal ideas. Okay, good, nice. Yeah, okay, nice, very good. Let's look at his wife. Okay, tell me about his wife. Okay, okay. How is she? Obviously, his wife, Nancy, is a representation of women. What do you think of this portrayal of women? Do you think it's fair? Do you think that the portrayal of Nancy as a representative of women is fair? No. Yeah, okay. How? Al Anud is saying that women are better than this. How is she? What is it that you don't agree with in the portrayal and the depiction of Nancy? Let's talk about her concerns. Let's talk about what she cares about. Are her ideas uh, as liberal and as new as those of her um, husband? Yeah, Maha is saying she was presented um, as if she only cares about fame and position. Yeah, this is what we're saying. This is what we're trying to prove, Ya Al Anud. We're looking at how she is presented and whether this presentation is fair or not. Okay? Yes. She is presented as having petty concerns. Petty means very small concerns. Remember how sad or upset she got when she got to know that all the female teachers doesn't have wives over there. Okay. Okay يا سحر, no problem. Okay. Okay. Um, Perhaps we should stop on this note and with this item so that other people, yani if they happen to have other classes, they can catch up with these classes. What I want you to do for next time, I would like you to again read Dead Man's Bath and the other novel, The Necklace, and I would like you to read them and look at the characters and how they are presented, women characters, the conflicts that we may have, the frustrations that we may get reading one of the short stories. And next time we'll talk about that, and we're going to continue with poetry. I'll give you 2 minutes before I leave so that you can ask any questions you may have. Okay, Dima has one question. Okay. Okay. It's about the TMA. Go ahead, dear Dima. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I think we spoke about that. It can be out of 1,000. Okay, I can simply convert it to 50. You don't have to worry about that. Okay, it's as simple as marking. I'll mark it myself out of 100, and then I'll convert it to 50. You don't have to worry about it. Okay. Yeah, somebody was having also a question. Al-Anud is saying, should I mention the criticism about the poem? Yeah, only if it is relevant. Okay, you're not going to mention everything. Whatever you think is going to support the ideas that you're promoting in the essay. You don't just go and get me criticism from anywhere that is irrelevant and say this is criticism. It has to be relevant to what we're talking about. Okay. Okay, that's okay. Maisa is asking. Okay. Um, should we write critic opinions in the essay? Whatever serves your point and your argument, ya Maisa. It's not about should or shouldn't. This is a piece of research. Okay, and with pieces of research, people don't rely on their own resources and full stop. You have to expand it a little bit to include the opinions of others in so far as they support or they add value to what you already said. No, don't be afraid. Just do what you're supposed to do, Al-Anud, and you'll be fine. Don't worry. You guys are doing a good job. Okay? Just focus and you are on your way, inshallah. I'm so proud of what you have done so far. You participate. You have very brilliant insights that I am so happy about. You're doing a good job and you shouldn't be afraid of anything. Okay, so unless you have other questions, we're going to call it a day. Okay, so I'll see you next week inshallah. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Bye bye.